everyone, it's Maam Steph right here and welcome once again to my YouTube channel. So in this video, we are going to discuss how to determine the equation of a quadratic function given only its graph. Now, what if you will be asked to find the equation of this graph? Of course, hindi madaling gawin lalo na't wala pa tayong nalalaman tungkol sa graph ng parabola. But if you already know something about the graph of a quadratic function, then we will use what we know, which is POVS, which stands for P, one point in the parabola. So that means we will only choose one point, whichever point na makikita natin sa ating parabola aside sa vertex. Next is, we will observe the opening of the parabola. Next is, we will determine the vertex of our parabola and then substitute the point and the vertex to our vertex form to solve for the coefficient a of our quadratic function and for the equation. So before we start our solution, let's recall that the vertex form of our quadratic function is given by the equation y equals a times the square of the quantity x minus h plus k, where h and k are the coordinates of the vertex. Now, going back to our problem wherein kailangan nating hanapin ang equation ng parabola na to. Una is, we will choose any point in our parabola aside from the vertex point. Now, in this case, we will choose 0, negative 5. Pwede nyo rin namang piliin ang 1 at saka negative 2. So, depende na lang sa inyo. But for now, we will choose 0, negative 5. Always remember that 0, negative 5 will satisfy our quadratic function because this represents an x value and negative 5 represents the y value of our quadratic function. Next is the opening of our parabola, which in this case is downwards. Now, this gives us the idea that the coefficient a of our quadratic function is a negative value. Next is the vertex, which is given by the point 2, negative 1. And take note that the vertex is our h and k values. Now, the last one is s, which is we are going to substitute the point and the vertex in our vertex form of a quadratic function. So, to substitute, this is the resulting equation. So, ang nangyari dito, y is replaced with negative 5, yung galing sa point natin. And then we will copy a, kasi yan yung isosolve natin for this part. And then x here is replaced with 0, galing sa ating point. And then minus, so we will just copy h. Yung h naman natin, given by our vertex, the x-coordinate of our vertex, which is 2. And then copy squared plus k. Yung k naman natin ay negative 1. And then we will just simplify this to solve for a. So, the result of this one, 0 minus 2 is just negative 2. Then squared, the result is 4. And then positive times negative 1, that becomes negative 1. And then we can see here na itong part na to or itong term na to has the unknown coefficient a. But negative 5 and 1 are both constant. So we can combine them. So we will combine them by transferring negative 1 to the other side of our equation. So the result will be negative 5 plus 1. Negative 1, since it crosses the equal sign, it will now become positive 1. And then 4 times a, that will be 4a. So to further simplify, negative 5 plus 1, the result is negative 4. That is equal to 4a. And to solve for a, we will just divide both sides with 4. So dividing both sides with 4, so that I can eliminate this, and I will be left with a on this side, and negative 4 divided by 4 is just negative 1. So from here, we have the value of a, which is -1, which confirms our assumption earlier that the value of the coefficient a of our quadratic function is negative. Now, ang susunod naman nating gagawin ay to substitute the vertex and a to get the equation. Again, gagamitin na naman natin yung ating vertex form. But this time, yung gagamitin natin is the vertex and the coefficient a. So, ito yung mangyayari. A is replaced with -1, like what we have here. And then, h will be replaced with the x-coordinate 2. K is replaced with -1. So, we will now simplify. This one right here is the result of x minus 2 squared. And then, this part, -1, is the result of this part right here. The next thing we do is we multiply this -1 right here to each term of our quadratic expression. So, we will use distributive property there. So the result will be -x squared, and -1 times -4x, the result is +4x, and -1 times +4, the result will be -4, and we will just copy. And since we can combine -4 and -1, the resulting equation will be y equals -x squared plus 4x minus 5. And so this is the quadratic function that we are looking for. So to check whether the equation that we got earlier is really the quadratic function that we are looking for, we will try to substitute the point 1 and -2. So if we substitute x equals 1 in our quadratic function, then we should get y equals -2 na value. And then 1 square is still -1. Because the negative is outside the parenthesis. And then we have 4 times 1, which is also 4, minus 5. And then if we're going to combine -1 plus 4, we have +3 minus 5, which is equal to -2. Therefore, we can now say that this quadratic function is really the function of this parabola. Next is, how about this parabola right here? So still, we will use POVS. First is the point, any point in our parabola. So this time, we will be using 1 and -1. So again, this point will give us the value of x and the value of y. Next is the opening of our parabola, which is upwards. That will give us the idea that the value of the coefficient a of our quadratic function is positive, since yung parabola natin is upwards. Next is the vertex. So in this graph, the vertex of our parabola is given by the point 0, -3. And this gives us h and k values. Next is to substitute these 2 points, the first point and the vertex point, in our vertex form of quadratic function to solve for the coefficient a. So to substitute, we have -1 equals a times the square of the quantity 1 minus 0 plus -3. So this time, 1 minus 0 is 1, and 1 square is just 1. And then positive times -3, that is -3. So then we combine the two constants in our parabola, which is -1 and -3. So the result will be 1 plus 3 equals a. Okay, and then that will give us the value of a, which is equal to +2. Now that we have the value of a, this now confirms our assumption earlier that the value of coefficient a is positive. The next thing we do is to substitute the vertex and the value of coefficient a to get our equation. So again, we use the vertex form of our quadratic function, and then a is replaced with 2, and then h is replaced with 0, and k is replaced with -3. So we have x minus 0 is equal to x, or we have 2x squared, and then we have -3 from right here. And then therefore, this is now our quadratic function. And now again, to check if the equation that we obtained is really the equation of this parabola, then we will check if we are going to have x equals -1, will it result to a y value which is also -1, which represents this point in this parabola. So we substitute x equals -1 to x. So x is replaced with -1, and -1 square is just 1. And then 1 times 2, that is equivalent to 2, minus 3, the result is y equals -1, which confirms that this equation is really the quadratic function of this graph. Now this time, I want you to solve with me and check if you can now determine the equation of the quadratic function given its graph. So let's try to look for the quadratic function of this graph right here. Is your answer y equals -x squared plus 2x plus 1? Then you are correct. Now for the bonus round, can you tell which graph represents the quadratic function y equals x squared minus 4x plus 5? If given this type of question, madali lang gawin. Pag meron na tayong quadratic function and all we need to do is parang nag-checking lang tayo. So in the first graph, we will test this point. Pag itong graph na to represents this function, if we substitute x equals -1, this function should give us y equals -1 just like this point. So if we're going to substitute x, that will give us this resulting equation. So -1 square is just 1, and this will be -4 plus 5, and the result is +2, which tells us that this is not the graph of this quadratic function. How about we test the second graph? So we will be choosing this point, 0, -5. So if we're going to substitute 0 to this quadratic function, it should give us y equals -5. So we're going to substitute 0 to x, then the result is +5, which means that this is not the graph of this quadratic function. Now, this tells us that this graph is the graph of this quadratic function. So, to prove that this graph is really the graph of this quadratic function, we will check if we are going to substitute 0 to our quadratic function, it should give us y equals +5, just like this point right here. So, substituting, we have 0 squared minus 4 times 0 plus 5, then it gives us y equals +5. And that's the end of this tutorial. I hope this helped you a lot in determining the equation of a quadratic function given its graph. And I hope to see you again for another math tutorial.